As a dungeon master, there is something I like to do personally. I like to internally, within my own mind, compete with myself what kind of things I can come up with on the, say, cheapest of a magical budget, or with these constraints and those constraints. What is the best I can come up with in place of the dungeon builder? And frequently I don't use all of the stuff that I come up with because sometimes it's too optimum, sometimes it's not the same flavor, sometimes it's my personal take on something else that I already thought of from a take of the other customized character from within the world. But what this has brought me to be doing is also, besides traps, where this all started because I love constructing those for my dungeons, I've got to think of magical objects that players themselves will get, and how to get the most enjoyment from the players, the most love of an object or a treasure from the least of the objects. Because we do have a meta budget that we need to obey. We don't get to overshower them with rewards until the planned campaign challenge bursts at the seams. So what I took to doing also is thinking up what is the most fantastic and glorious and filled with personality little item that takes up little of meta space. What can I do with that? What is the most iconic and memorable stuff I can come up with the least of power budget, of magical budget, to create an artifact, shall we say? So here are some examples. You can have, say, a pet rock, which is animated somewhere at some time, for whatever reason, to behave almost exactly as if it was a pet dog. But this is a solid, bigger than a brick rock that just sort of slides around and tumbles around, and it's not vocal, but it can try to jump up your leg happily and sort of wag its whole body mass in place, and so on. Now you might wonder, what would be a use of a pet rock? But if your pet rock can move like a dog and obey somewhat commands like a dog, then this is a perfect pet for dungeoneering. It can come up to those trap switches and jump on top of stuff that needs to be broken, and so on and so forth, which can be done with some reasonable safety, with party all the way back and the pet rock all the way in front. Unlikely to get really seriously hurt or destroyed in most such low-level cases where such treasure as it is appropriate reward. But still, people might grow attached. They might want to keep their pet rock very safe, especially if it actually has a soul of an animal inside, which I wasn't actually insinuating. You can let them guess whether it has or not, especially if they're indeed low level enough that they can't really check yet. Easily, at least. So you can let them get attached to the object in some enjoyable and familiar way whilst they're not sure that it is indeed a living creature. So they needn't necessarily treat it as a creature, and you needn't necessarily make it a creature. But with all these traits and uses, it is quite a charming one to have. And then, not to mention all the counter traps, now that I'm thinking about it, that they can make on top of it for it to go and be a sort of forward-moving turret for them, and so on and so forth. There's many things that it can do. You can attach a sort of some discarded cloak that's not even useful for anything on top of it, and on top of some fluffing and sticks, and there you go. Pretend silhouette of a walking person. Many more things can be done. Also, it can be floating if you find it too noisy to be always dragging on the ground. That way, it dramatically improves its usability, but it's up to you how silent yet moving on the floor versus floating you want it to be. Now, for another example that's not so animal-like, what about chalk that can float anywhere you can sort of track it visually within several meters, or if you want to be generous, as long as you can reasonably see it. And then it sort of telekinetically flies around where you want to use it, and it's sort of just a chalk, but think of all the uses. Think of all the uses for marking out stuff, for flipping switches, for it's like a flying finger that you can use. So there's all those uses. It can always touch the item before you touch the item. It can always mark a hallway with writing in detail without you needing to spend much time as you walk along. But there are dangers, of course. If switch is too hard and you press too hard, it can snap in two and lose a half of it. But how do you maintain it? Because it being a piece of chalk on usually rough terrain, well, you want to feed it other not magical pieces of chalk. Maybe it can even change colors depending on what you feed it the most. At any rate, that is how you fill it back up, and it spends itself much slower than a normal chalk would, but you still need to feed it regularly, like daily, for example. Of course, that's only if you spend it daily, but yes. And then that also can have its further uses. Don't forget that it shouldn't have too big of a carrying capacity, but the cloak trick from before should still work if it's a light cloak. You won't need as many sticks if you use it correctly, for example. Then you can have a little lens that always starts a fire as if it was under full sunlight. Maybe it's drawing sunlight from somewhere. Very useful against vampires and such if you just point it at them, though it might be close range and everything. But even if you don't use it against solar challenged undead, you can always use it as a very quick fire starter that is very silent and very easy to use with one hand very stealthily. Say by a rogue, as some sort of sleight of hand type of trick, where you want to start opponent's equipment burning or their potion exploding, something else like that. Maybe you just want to melt some part of a mechanism on a door or something like that. That can also be done after a long focusing session. And so on and so forth. You can really use something like that in many ways. Then, how about an indestructible string? That's a bit higher level, but still. It can be just an arm's length and it will still be a magnificent artifact, or you can be a bit more generous and have it a bit longer, several arm lengths or so. And then this thing can be a dangerous weapon, a mighty powerful implement of sawing through things, or it can even be a component for building a new weapon. Now imagine a fully metal bow with stainless steel springs that can be tethered with this as a bowstring. It just needs very strong strength score to pull, but imagine the kind of damage that thing will deal. So just see what your imagination can come up with for the smallest and most innocent of objects with the most simplest but very broadly utilitarian purposes. And be very cautious with how long a range they have, how powerful they are, and so on and so forth, so that they are more versatile than they are OP. And you'll have treasures that your players will love more than a premium class-based object, because they'll provide endless hours of fun and improvisation. And so, adventure, if you thought this was useful or unique, maybe you can spare me a click, and I could see you here next, or even perhaps every week, because I have more such things for you. I come up with them myself. I'm M, and welcome to dMTable. See you next time.